I used to believe Amelia and I were the kind of couple people aspired to be. You know the type. Partners who radiate love and understanding, who could finish each other's sentences, and whose laughter echoed through every room of their home. That's what I thought we were. That's what I wanted to believe. I met Amelia during one of the lowest points in my life. I had just started my business, struggling to keep my head above water. The stress was overwhelming, and there were days when I thought about giving up entirely. Then she came along, this beautiful, vibrant woman with a smile that could disarm the most cynical man alive. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She gave me hope, and for that, I swore to cherish her forever. In the early days, we were inseparable. We did everything together. Grocery shopping, binge-watching terrible romantic comedies, even folding laundry. I'd tease her about her obsession with folding towels, just so, and she'd laugh and call me hopeless. I loved those moments. They were simple, yes, but they were ours. When the business started to take off, our lives changed. Suddenly, I was the successful husband with a thriving company, and Amelia was the supportive wife who had stuck by my side through thick and thin. I bought her the house she always dreamed of, the one with the big bay windows and the cozy reading nook where she could curl up with her favorite books. I thought I was giving her the world, but success comes with a price. My time became a luxury I couldn't afford. The long hours, the late nights, the business trips, they all chipped away at the time we spent together. I reassured myself that it was for us, for our future, and Amelia always seemed to understand. Or so I thought. Looking back, I see now that there were signs. Little things that didn't add up. Moments that should have made me pause. The way she'd sometimes pull away from my touch as if I were a stranger. The way her eyes would light up at her phone, followed by a quick, guilty glance in my direction. And then there were the girls' nights out that seemed to multiply, the excuses that didn't quite ring true. But I ignored them. I told myself I was overthinking, that Amelia loved me and would never betray me. I wanted to believe in us so badly that I blinded myself to the cracks forming in our marriage. One memory stands out more than others now, haunting me like a ghost. It was our anniversary last year. I had planned an elaborate dinner at her favorite restaurant, complete with a string quartet and a private table overlooking the city. But she seemed distracted, her laughter forced, her smile a shadow of what it used to be. I chalked it up to stress, promising myself that I'd make more time for her. "I'm fine, really," she had said when I asked if something was wrong. But her eyes told a different story. They were distant, almost as if she were looking past me, searching for something, or someone else. I should have pressed her then. I should have listened to that gnawing feeling in my gut. But I didn't. I'd let it go, thinking that love was enough to weather any storm. Now, sitting here, replaying the memories, I can't help but feel like a fool. How could I not see it? How could I miss the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the clues she left behind like breadcrumbs? I thought I knew her, that we were partners in every sense of the word. But the woman I loved, the woman I would have done anything for, had been slipping away from me while I was too busy building a future for us to notice. And yet, even now, there's a part of me that clings to those good times, to the laughter and the love we once shared. I don't want to believe that it was all a lie. I don't want to believe that the woman who held my hand during the hardest times of my life is capable of the betrayal that has turned my world upside down. I tell myself that there must be an explanation, that maybe I've misunderstood. But deep down, I know the truth. The cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks. They were chasms, and I had been too blind to see them until it was too late. As I sit here, the memory of her laugh echoing in my mind, I feel a strange mix of emotions: love, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The Amelia I knew, the Amelia I loved, feels like a stranger now. And yet, despite everything, I can't help but wonder, was it my fault? I don't think I'll ever forget that day. It started like any other, or at least it seemed like it would. I woke up early, kissed Amelia goodbye as she lay half asleep in bed, and headed to the office. It was a critical day for me. A multi-million-dollar deal was hanging in the balance, and I was determined to secure it. The meeting had gone well. I was on cloud nine as I reviewed the terms of the deal in my head, already imagining the celebration I'd planned for Amelia once everything was finalized. I wanted to surprise her with something special, maybe that vacation to Santorini she'd been dreaming about. But then it hit me. The file. The damn file. I had left one of the most important documents for the deal at home. My assistant, Richard, had called to remind me, his voice tinged with panic. My initial reaction was frustration at myself for being so careless, but it quickly turned into determination. I had time to retrieve it before the next phase of the negotiations. I called Amelia on the way, wanting to let her know I'd be stopping by. No answer. That wasn't unusual. She often left her phone on silent when she was at home. Still, a little voice in the back of my mind nagged at me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always, quiet, welcoming, ours. But as I walked up the steps, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately struck by the stillness. Something felt off. The faint sound of laughter floated down the hallway. A laugh I recognized. Amelia's laugh. For a split second, I smiled. Maybe she had a friend over, I thought. Maybe she was laughing at some silly joke or a scene from one of those romantic comedies she loved. But then I heard another laugh. Deep, male, and unmistakably familiar. I froze. The laughter was coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. I don't remember deciding to move. My feet just carried me up the stairs. The closer I got, the more the uneasiness grew, wrapping around my chest like a vice. The door to our room was ajar, and I could see shadows dancing on the walls. I peeked inside, and the world as I knew it shattered. Amelia was there, her face alight with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in months. And with her was Maxwell, my childhood friend, the man I had trusted like a brother. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy being entangled. I felt a surge of anger so intense that it was almost blinding. My mind screamed at me to walk away, to leave before I did something I'd regret. But I couldn't. I pushed the door open with enough force to make it slam against the wall. The sound startled them, and they jumped apart like guilty teenagers caught by a parent. Amelia's face drained of color. She scrambled to cover herself with the bedsheet, her eyes wide with panic. "Jonathan, But it wasn't her voice that cut through the silence. It was Maxwell's. He stood there, shirtless and smug, with a look of arrogance that made my blood boil. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I guess you weren't supposed to be home, were you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No apology, no shame, just a challenge. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. Maxwell shrugged, unfazed. "What does it look like? You're always away on business. Someone has to keep your wife entertained." He smirked, as if daring me to react. "What are you going to do about it?" I saw red. The next few moments were a blur. 1 second, I was standing there, fists clenched, and the next, I had lunged at him. We collided with a force that knocked the bedside lamp to the floor. He tried to fight back, but I was fueled by a rage I'd never felt before. My fists connected with his smug face, over and over, until Amelia's screams finally broke through the haze. "Jonathan, stop! You're going to hurt him!" Her voice only made me angrier. I grabbed Maxwell's arm and twisted it until I heard a sickening crack. He howled in pain, clutching his now limp arm as he stumbled back, crashing into the dresser. "You're lucky that's all I did," I spat, my voice low and dangerous. Get the hell out of my house before I really lose my temper. Maxwell glared at me, his bravado gone. He muttered something about calling the police, but he didn't stick around long enough to follow through. He grabbed his shirt and bolted, leaving Amelia and me alone in the wreckage. She stood there, clutching the bedsheet around her like it was some kind of shield. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing but disgust. "Jonathan, I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice trembling. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt a wave of sorrow so profound it nearly knocked me over. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her to face the mess she had made. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but the pressure in my chest refused to subside. Maxwell's mocking voice echoed in my mind, his smug words digging deeper into my wounded pride. "What are you going to do about it?" I wanted to scream, to hit something, anything. But instead, I pulled over at a deserted park and buried my face in my hands. The cool night air seeped through the car window, doing little to cool the fiery rage coursing through me. Amelia's face flashed before my eyes, not the tear-streaked face from earlier, but the Amelia I thought I knew. The one who'd laugh at my terrible jokes, who'd kiss me goodbye every morning as if I were the only man in the world. That Amelia felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a stranger who had shattered everything we built together. Eventually, I turned the car around and headed back home. I had no plan, no clear idea of what I'd say or do, but I knew I couldn't just run away. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Amelia was sitting on the living room couch, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but didn't know how. I stood there for a moment, staring at her. The words wouldn't come. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to yell, to accuse, to demand answers. But all I could manage was a single cold question. How long? Amelia flinched as if I'd struck her. "Jonathan, please." "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "How long?" I repeated, my voice rising. She hesitated, then whispered, "A few months." Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. The weight of her confession hit me like a freight train. All those business trips, all those nights I thought she was home alone, and she was with him, with Maxwell. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Amelia looked down, twisting her hands nervously. I don't know. You're always so busy, Jonathan. You're never here. I felt lonely, and Maxwell, he was just there." "Lonely?" I repeated, incredulous. "You felt lonely, so you slept with my best friend?" She winced at my words, but didn't deny them. Her silence was deafening. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I continued, my voice trembling with anger. "You didn't just betray me, you destroyed us. Everything we built, everything I thought we had, it's all gone. For what? A few stolen moments with him?" Tears streamed down her face, but they did nothing to soften my resolve. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know I hurt you, but I still love you, Jonathan. Please, don't let this be the end." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Don't talk to me about love, Amelia. You don't destroy the people you love." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking on the wall. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I had once vowed to love and protect. But all I could feel now was anger and a profound sense of loss. "I need you to leave," I said finally, my voice cold and firm. She looked up, startled. "What?" "You heard me. Pack a bag and leave. Go to your parents' house, a hotel, I don't care. But I can't look at you right now." "Jonathan, please." "Get out," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. Amelia recoiled as if I'd slapped her, then slowly stood. She didn't argue further. Instead, she turned and walked up the stairs, her footsteps heavy with defeat. I heard the soft sound of a suitcase being zipped, followed by the creak of the front door opening and closing. When she was gone, the silence of the house felt oppressive. I sat down on the couch, staring at the spot where she had been moments before. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to forgive her, to pretend this had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had seen her with Maxwell, knew there was no going back. I had spent my life building something I thought was unbreakable. But now I was left with nothing but broken pieces, and I had no idea how to put them back together. I leaned back, closing my eyes as exhaustion finally took hold. The confrontation was over, but the war inside me had only just begun. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt hollow, like a shell of what it once was. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards as I moved around. Amelia was gone. Her absence should have brought me some sense of relief, but it didn't. It felt like the wound had been left open, raw and exposed, with no salve to ease the pain. I sat at the dining table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, staring blankly at the surface. My mind replayed the events of the previous day like a broken record. Her betrayal, his smugness, my anger. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Richard, my assistant, asking if I'd managed to retrieve the file for the business deal. The deal. For a moment, I had completely forgotten about it. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. How could I care about contracts and negotiations when my entire world had crumbled overnight? But I couldn't let the business suffer. If there was one thing I could still control, it was my work. I grabbed the file and headed to the office, trying to push the chaos in my personal life to the back of my mind. At the office, I tried to focus on the deal, but my colleagues noticed the tension in my demeanor. "You okay, boss?" Richard asked cautiously. I forced a smile and nodded, but the truth was, I felt anything but okay. The business meeting went off without a hitch, but I felt disconnected from it all, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. When I returned home that evening, the weight of Amelia's absence hit me harder than I expected. Her favorite throw blanket was still draped over the couch, her slippers neatly placed by the door. Every corner of the house was a reminder of her, of us, and of the life I thought we had. I wanted to rip it all away, to erase every trace of her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The first few days after the confrontation were the hardest. My emotions swung wildly between anger, sadness, and a hollow numbness that left me feeling like a shell of myself. I avoided my friends and family, not ready to answer their inevitable questions or endure their pitying looks. But isolation only gave my mind more room to spiral. Maxwell's smug face haunted me, his words replaying in my head. "What are you going to do about it?" And Amelia, her tear-streaked face, her weak excuses, they were like daggers twisting in my chest. Eventually, I realized that sitting in my misery wouldn't solve anything. If I wanted to move forward, I needed to take action. But what kind of action? I could forgive her, let it go, and try to rebuild. That's what the old Jonathan would have done. The man who believed in second chances and the power of love. But that man was gone. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about humiliation. Maxwell had challenged me in my own home, on my own bed. Amelia had desecrated everything we shared with her selfishness. They both needed to face the consequences. I started with Maxwell. The man had walked away with nothing but a broken arm, and that wasn't enough. I needed to destroy him, to make him feel the kind of pain I was feeling. I called my old college friend Daniel, a private investigator who owed me a favor. "I need everything you can find on Maxwell," I told him. His finances, his personal life, his darkest secrets. I want it all. Daniel didn't ask questions. Within days, he uncovered enough dirt on Maxwell to make my blood boil. Fraudulent business deals, unpaid debts, a mistress who had no idea he was cheating on her too. It was all there, wrapped up in a tidy little folder. Armed with this information, I started making calls. Maxwell's investors, his clients, even his mistress. I exposed every skeleton in his closet. His carefully constructed life unraveled faster than I could have imagined. Watching Maxwell's downfall was satisfying, but it didn't erase the pain of Amelia's betrayal. She wasn't off the hook, not by a long shot. Amelia called me several times during those first few weeks. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. Her messages were a mix of apologies and pleas for forgiveness, each one more desperate than the last. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Instead, I focused on gathering my own evidence. I went through our shared finances, looking for anything that might strengthen my case in the inevitable divorce. I reached out to my lawyer, Margaret, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen her fair share of messy separations. "She cheated," I told Margaret bluntly. "I want to make sure she gets nothing." Margaret nodded, her expression calm but determined. "We'll make it happen." As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a sense of control returning. The chaos was still there, but now it had a direction. I wasn't just a victim of their betrayal. I was the architect of their downfall. But even as I plotted my next moves, a part of me wondered if it was enough. Could revenge truly heal the wounds they'd inflicted? Or was I setting myself up for a hollow victory? The weeks rolled by, but the anger burning inside me never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, feeding on every voicemail Amelia left, every bitter memory that replayed in my head. I couldn't escape it. Not during the quiet hours of the night, not in the bustling chaos of the office. It was always there, a constant gnawing ache reminding me of the betrayal I'd endured. But anger, I realized, wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just be mad. I needed to act, to take control of the situation and show both Amelia and Maxwell that I wasn't the man they thought I was. I wasn't going to crumble. I started by doubling down on the divorce preparations. Margaret, my lawyer, was relentless. She guided me through every step, ensuring we left no stone unturned. We gathered every piece of evidence I had: the footage from the cameras I'd installed for security, the text messages I'd managed to retrieve from her phone records, and even testimony from the housekeeper, Gloria, who had witnessed Amelia sneaking Maxwell into the house on more than one occasion. Margaret was a fortress of calm during my storm. She outlined our strategy with clinical precision, ensuring Amelia would walk away with nothing but the clothes on her back. "With this evidence," she said confidently, "you'll have the upper hand in court." But this wasn't just about the legal battle. I needed to confront Amelia again. Not for closure, but for clarity. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and admit why she did what she did. I needed to know if there was even a shred of truth left in the life we had built together. I called her one evening, my voice steady but cold. "We need to talk, face to face." She hesitated before agreeing to meet me at a small cafe we used to frequent during our early years together. As I waited for her to arrive, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sliver of something I couldn't quite name. When she walked in, she looked like a ghost of herself. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, and her usually impeccable appearance was disheveled. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she reached for her glass of water. "Jonathan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for meeting me." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted her to feel the weight of my silence, to understand just how deeply she had hurt me. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice low and steady. "I need to hear it from you, Amelia. Why him? Why Maxwell?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "I told you before," she said, her voice cracking. "I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. So your solution was to sleep with my best friend? To betray me in the worst way possible? Tears streamed down her face, but I refused to let them soften me. It wasn't like that, she said desperately. I didn't mean for it to happen. Maxwell, he was just there, and I made a terrible mistake. I regret it more than you'll ever know. Her words sounded hollow, like rehearsed lines from a bad play. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash, Amelia. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. She flinched, but I didn't stop. And what about Maxwell? What made you think he was worth throwing away everything we had? Did you think he'd stick around? That he'd love you the way I did? She shook her head, sobbing. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for what I've done. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was genuinely remorseful, that the woman I had loved wasn't a complete stranger. But the damage was done, and no amount of tears could undo it. I'm filing for divorce, I said bluntly, and I'm making sure you get nothing. You don't deserve it. Her sobs grew louder, but I stood firm. You made your choice, Amelia. Now you'll live with the consequences. I stood to leave, but she grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. Jonathan, please. Can't we try to fix this? I'll do anything. I love you. I looked down at her, my voice cold. You don't destroy the people you love. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, the fog in my mind began to lift. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking control. Amelia and Maxwell thought they could shatter my life and walk away unscathed. But they were wrong. The turning point wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about reclaiming my power. They had underestimated me, and now they were going to pay for it. The day I decided to destroy Maxwell, something inside me shifted. It wasn't enough to simply walk away from this mess and let him slink off into the shadows. He had mocked me, insulted me, and betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. He thought he could challenge me, smirking in my own home, asking, "What will you do about it?" Well, now he was going to find out. I started by gathering everything I knew about him. Maxwell had always been the type to exaggerate his success. His flashy suits, his big talk about deals that never seemed to materialize, and his tendency to surround himself with people who could elevate his image. Beneath the surface, I'd always suspected there was something shady about him, but I'd never cared enough to dig deeper. Now I cared. I called Daniel, my old college friend turned private investigator. I need dirt on Maxwell, I told him. Whatever you can find, business, personal, financial, I want it all. Daniel didn't hesitate. Give me a week, he said. While Daniel worked, I started making moves of my own. I reached out to a few mutual acquaintances, planting subtle questions about Maxwell's dealings. It didn't take long for whispers to start circulating. One thing about Maxwell was that his ego often led him to brag about things he shouldn't. I began connecting the dots, piecing together a picture of a man who wasn't nearly as untouchable as he liked to pretend. When Daniel called me back, he had everything I needed and more. You were right, he said. The guy's a walking disaster. He's been skimming money from his clients, using fake shell companies to hide his tracks. He's also drowning in debt, gambling mostly. And he's got a mistress who has no idea he's been stringing her along for years. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Maxwell wasn't just a liar and a cheat. He was a fraud. Send me everything, I told Daniel. Within hours, I had a folder packed with incriminating evidence. Emails, bank statements, text messages. It was all there, a roadmap to Maxwell's inevitable downfall. My first target was his professional reputation. I compiled the most damning pieces of evidence and sent them anonymously to his biggest clients and investors. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. One by one, they pulled their contracts, cutting ties with him and demanding explanations. Maxwell's name was suddenly toxic, and his business began to crumble. Next, I went after his personal life. Using the information Daniel had gathered, I contacted his mistress, a woman named Lisa. At first, she didn't believe me. Maxwell would never do something like that, she said, her voice trembling. Check your email, I told her. I had sent her screenshots of his messages to Amelia, along with proof of his gambling debts and other infidelities. When she called me back, her voice was shaking with rage. I can't believe I trusted him, she said. I'm done with him. Lisa wasn't the only one. Maxwell's wife, Vanessa, who I had assumed was blissfully unaware, found out everything within days. She filed for divorce almost immediately, taking what little he had left. Watching Maxwell's life implode should have felt like victory, but it wasn't as sweet as I'd hoped. Sure, his smug face no longer haunted me. He wasn't the cocky, untouchable man who had challenged me in my own home. He was broken, humiliated, and alone. But the truth is, revenge doesn't heal the wounds. It doesn't fill the hollow space where trust and love used to live. Even as I dismantled Maxwell's life piece by piece, the pain of Amelia's betrayal lingered. One evening, I saw Maxwell for the first time since the confrontation. He showed up at my office unannounced, his arm still in a sling from the injury I'd given him. What do you want? I asked coldly. He looked like a shadow of the man he used to be, unshaven, disheveled, and visibly defeated. I just came to say I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I was thinking. I've lost everything because of this, Jonathan. My business, my marriage, everything. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly snuffed out by the memory of him standing in my bedroom, smirking as he asked, "What will you do about it?" "You brought this on yourself," I said, my voice like ice. "You made your choices, Maxwell. Now live with the consequences." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as he turned to leave. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry," he muttered before walking out the door. As I watched him go, I felt no triumph, no sense of closure. Destroying Maxwell's life had been necessary, but it hadn't healed the scars he and Amelia had left behind. If anything, it had only reminded me of how much I had lost. Still, there was one more person who needed to face the consequences. Amelia wasn't off the hook. Not yet. After dismantling Maxwell's life, I turned my attention to Amelia. She had spent weeks trying to contact me. Calls, texts, even emails, all begging for another chance. At first, I ignored her. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, much less entertain the idea of reconciliation. But as the days passed, I realized that ignoring her wasn't enough. She needed to face the consequences of her actions just as much as Maxwell had. I started by creating distance, not just physically, but emotionally. I moved out of our bedroom and began sleeping in the guest room before I eventually left the house altogether. It was easier that way, not having to see her face, not having to hear her pathetic attempts at apologies. I could feel her panic growing with each passing day. She could sense that her grip on our marriage was slipping, and she was powerless to stop it. When I finally agreed to meet her, it was under my terms. I chose a neutral location, a small, quiet restaurant where we wouldn't be interrupted. She arrived early, looking nervous and out of place in the room's calm ambiance. Her hair was disheveled, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. I didn't respond. I simply folded my hands on the table and waited for her to speak. She launched into a rehearsed monologue, apologizing profusely and blaming her actions on loneliness, on feeling neglected, on Maxwell's manipulation. It was the same tired excuse she had given me before. "I know I hurt you, Jonathan," she said, her voice trembling. "But I still love you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I asked coldly. "Do you have any idea how deeply you've broken me?" She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I do," she whispered. "I hate myself for it every single day." "Good," I said flatly. "You should." Her tears began to flow freely, but I felt no sympathy. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the betrayal of trust, the violation of everything we had built together. "You destroyed our marriage," I continued, my voice steady but sharp. "You let him into our home, into our bed, and you think a simple apology will fix that?" She sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know how to make it right," she cried, "but I'll do anything. Please, Jonathan, don't throw everything away." I shook my head. "You already threw everything away. The moment you let him into our bed, you ended us." For a moment, the only sound between us was her quiet sobbing. Then, with a deep breath, I delivered the final blow. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice firm. "And I've already made sure you won't get a penny from me." Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face a mask of shock. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me," I said. "I've been working with my lawyer. I have all the evidence I need, your texts, your calls, the footage from the cameras. You won't walk away with anything, Amelia. Not the house, not the money, nothing." Her lips trembled as she stared at me, the reality of her situation sinking in. "Jonathan, please," she begged. "Don't do this. I have nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences." She tried to plead with me, but I stood and walked out, leaving her alone in the restaurant. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, I made sure Amelia felt the weight of her actions. I stopped responding to her entirely, leaving her isolated and desperate. Our mutual friends, many of whom I had confided in, began to distance themselves from her. The whispers about her infidelity spread quickly, and soon she became a pariah in our social circle. I heard from Gloria, our housekeeper, that Amelia had started spending her days in the house, wandering from room to room like a ghost. She wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, wasn't living. A small part of me felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. She had made her bed, literally, and now she had to lie in it. One evening, I received an email from her. It was long and rambling, filled with apologies and declarations of love. She begged me to come home, to give her another chance. She promised to change, to be better. I didn't respond. I couldn't. This was her isolation, her punishment. And as much as it hurt me to see her fall apart, I knew it was necessary. She had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable, and forgiveness wasn't an option. But even as I watched her world crumble, I couldn't shake the feeling that my revenge wasn't complete. She was suffering, yes. But was it enough? Could anything truly be enough to erase the pain she and Maxwell had caused me? The decision to file for divorce wasn't easy, but it was necessary. There was no salvaging what Amelia and I once had. Her betrayal had cut too deep, leaving wounds that no apology or promise could ever heal. Margaret, my lawyer, was a sharp, methodical woman who had seen her fair share of messy divorces. She listened intently as I laid out everything. Amelia's affair with Maxwell, the evidence I had gathered, and my desire to ensure she walked away with nothing. "You've got a solid case," she said, flipping through the stack of documents I had provided. "Adultery, financial stability on your side, and evidence that's hard to dispute. If she tries to contest this, she'll only make things worse for herself." That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The first step was filing the papers, a move that would set everything in motion. Margaret drafted the documents with precision, detailing the grounds for divorce and listing the evidence of her infidelity. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of what our marriage had become. When the papers were served to Amelia, I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I heard about it through Gloria. She cried for hours. Gloria told me when I called to check on the house. She kept saying she didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Of course she didn't. Amelia had spent weeks pleading for forgiveness, convinced that my anger would eventually fade and I'd take her back. But she underestimated me. She thought I'd be weak, that I'd let her betrayal slide for the sake of our history. She was wrong. In the weeks that followed, Margaret and I worked tirelessly to ensure the divorce proceedings went in my favor. We dug into our shared finances, identifying every asset and making sure Amelia had no claim to anything beyond what the law required. The footage from the cameras became the centerpiece of our case, undeniable proof of her infidelity. Margaret also advised me to remove Amelia from any joint accounts and freeze access to the credit cards I'd provided her. It was a cold move, but a necessary one. If she wanted to spend money, she'd have to do it on her own dime. Amelia's response to the legal onslaught was predictable. She called me, sobbing and accusing me of being cruel, of punishing her beyond what was fair. "Jonathan, I know I messed up," she said during one of her many desperate voicemails. "But do you really have to destroy me like this? We shared a life together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Her words struck a nerve, but I refused to let them sway me. We had shared a life, yes, but she had destroyed it the moment she let Maxwell into our home. Whatever love I had left for her had been drowned in a sea of anger and betrayal. The court hearings were brief but intense. Amelia sat across from me, looking fragile and defeated as Margaret laid out our case with clinical precision. The judge reviewed the evidence, his expression hardening as he watched the footage. "Based on the evidence presented," the judge said, his voice firm, "the court finds that the respondent's actions constitute a clear breach of marital trust. The petitioner is granted a divorce on grounds of adultery, with no claim to shared assets awarded to the respondent." It was over. Just like that, the life Amelia and I had built together was legally dissolved. After the hearing, Amelia approached me in the hallway, her eyes red and swollen. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I still love you." I stared at her, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. "You don't destroy the people you love," I said, echoing the words I had told her before. Her shoulders slumped, and she walked away without another word. In the days that followed, I finalized every loose end. Margaret ensured that the transfer of assets was seamless, leaving Amelia with nothing but the clothes she had packed when she first left the house. I sold the home we had shared, unwilling to live in a space filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. The money from the sale went toward a fresh start, a new apartment, a new life. But no matter how far I tried to move forward, the scars of Amelia's betrayal lingered. Even as I stood in my new place, looking out at a skyline that symbolized endless possibilities, I couldn't shake the question that haunted me. Was this enough? Revenge had brought me closure in some ways. It had given me control, a sense of justice. But it hadn't erased the pain. It hadn't filled the void that Amelia and Maxwell had left behind. As I sat down at my desk that night, pouring myself a glass of whiskey, I realized something. The real revenge wasn't in destroying their lives. It was in rebuilding mine, stronger, better, and unshaken by the people who had tried to tear me down. The divorce was finalized, the assets divided, or rather withheld, and the dust of Amelia's betrayal had seemingly settled. But it wasn't over for me. Not yet. Despite everything, I still felt a lingering sense of unfinished business. Maxwell's downfall had been satisfying, and Amelia's isolation had been just. But I wanted something more. Not just closure. I wanted to ensure that their betrayal was etched into their memories forever. I devised a plan, one final act to deliver the ultimate blow to both Amelia and Maxwell. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking control of the narrative. I wanted them to see me, not as the victim of their deceit, but as someone who had risen above their actions, stronger and unshaken. The opportunity came in the form of a gala. It was a charity event Amelia and I used to attend together, an annual affair where the city's elite gathered to raise money for a good cause and, of course, show off. I hadn't been planning to go, but when I heard through mutual acquaintances that both Maxwell and Amelia would be attending, I knew I couldn't resist. I arrived at the gala with purpose, wearing a tailored black suit that exuded confidence and strength. People greeted me warmly, congratulating me on my recent business success and asking about Amelia. I brushed off their questions with polite detachment, knowing the real show was yet to begin. It wasn't long before I spotted Maxwell. He was standing near the bar, looking haggard and out of place among the crowd. His fall from grace was evident. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, and his usual bravado had been replaced by a nervous energy. Amelia was harder to find, but eventually, I saw her lingering near the corner of the room, her once vibrant presence dimmed. She looked fragile, almost ghost-like, as if the weight of her decisions had drained her of life. I let them see me before I approached. Maxwell's eyes widened when he spotted me, and I saw him stiffen, his good arm gripping the edge of the bar as if he were bracing himself. Amelia, too, froze when our eyes met, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, though no words came. I didn't go to them directly. Instead, I mingled, laughing and chatting with other guests as if I didn't have a care in the world. I wanted them to see me thriving, to see that their betrayal hadn't broken me. Then, as the evening progressed, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. It was time for the auction, a centerpiece of the gala where prominent attendees donated items or experiences to be bid on for charity. I had prepared something special, a vacation package to an exclusive resort, accompanied by a video presentation showcasing the destination's luxurious offerings. The lights dimmed as the video began to play. But instead of tropical beaches and lavish suites, the screen lit up with something else entirely. Footage from my home security cameras. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they watched the damning evidence unfold. Maxwell and Amelia caught in the act, their betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. The room fell silent, save for the occasional murmur of disbelief. I stood off to the side, watching their reactions. Maxwell's face turned a deep shade of red, his jaw clenching as he realized what was happening. Amelia, on the other hand, looked as if she might faint. Her hands flew to her face, and I could see the tears streaming down her cheeks even from across the room. When the video ended, the lights came back on, and all eyes turned to me. I stepped forward, my expression calm and composed. "I apologize for the unexpected interruption," I said smoothly, my voice carrying through the room. But I felt it was important to highlight the importance of integrity, both in our personal and professional lives. There was a smattering of awkward applause, though most of the audience remained stunned. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked off the stage, but I didn't care. The message had been delivered. Maxwell stormed out of the room, his steps uneven as he pushed through the crowd. Amelia stayed behind, frozen in place as people whispered and stared. As I left the gala, I felt a sense of finality. This was the closure I needed, not just for me, but for them. They had thought they could betray me without consequence, but now their actions were laid bare for the world to see. In the days that followed, I heard through mutual friends that Amelia had left the city, unable to face the shame. Maxwell, too, had disappeared from public view, his reputation irreparably damaged. And me? I moved on, truly moved on. I wasn't the same man I had been before their betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, and more focused on building a life that was mine and mine alone. Maxwell and Amelia were no longer weights dragging me down. They were simply lessons, reminders of what I would never allow into my life again. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. When the dust finally settled, and the chaos Amelia and Maxwell brought into my life faded into a distant memory, I found myself in a place I hadn't been in years, at peace. The house I had shared with Amelia was sold. It was strange watching the movers pack up what was left of a life that had once meant everything to me. Each item told a story. Our wedding photo, the books we'd read together, even the coffee table where we used to sit and plan our future. I didn't keep anything that reminded me of her. Those memories belonged to a past I was ready to leave behind. The new place I moved into was smaller, simpler, and completely mine. No ghosts of betrayal haunted its walls, no lingering shadows of shared moments. It felt good to start fresh. Work became my anchor during those months. The business thrived, my team flourished, and I poured myself into every deal, every project. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. There was no drama, no distractions, just me and the goals I had set for myself. Friends who had distanced themselves during the scandal began reaching out again, cautiously at first. I think they were testing the waters, unsure if I was ready to talk about everything. But I didn't mind. Slowly, I started letting them back into my life, though I was careful about who I trusted. The betrayal had left scars, and I wasn't eager to invite anyone into my inner circle who didn't deserve to be there. One evening, while sitting in my new living room with a glass of whiskey in hand, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Amelia's. For a moment, I considered throwing it away without opening it. What more could she possibly have to say? But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long, filled with apologies and reflections. She wrote about how she regretted everything, how she had underestimated the damage her actions would cause. She admitted that she had been selfish, that she hadn't realized what she had until it was too late. "I don't expect your forgiveness," she wrote. "I just want you to know that losing you is the greatest regret of my life." I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was no satisfaction in her words, no vindication, just sadness. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. As time went on, I began to focus more on myself. I started traveling, something I hadn't done much of since my business took off. I visited cities I'd always wanted to see, explored cultures I'd only read about, and rediscovered parts of myself I thought I'd lost. During one of those trips, in a small coastal town, I met someone. Her name was Elena, a woman with a kind smile and a sharp wit. She wasn't flashy or dramatic, just genuine. We started talking over coffee at a quaint little cafe, and what began as casual conversation turned into hours of laughter and shared stories. I wasn't looking for a relationship, and I told her as much. But Elena didn't seem to mind. She told me she wasn't looking for anything serious either, that she was just enjoying the moment. And that's exactly what we did. Enjoyed the moment. With Elena, there was no pressure, no expectations. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't feel the need to explain. It was refreshing, being with someone who didn't see me as the man who had been betrayed or the man who had exacted revenge. She just saw me. Over time, our connection deepened. It wasn't love at first sight, but something quieter, steadier. Elena taught me how to trust again, how to open myself up without fear of being hurt. When I finally told her about Amelia and Maxwell, she listened without judgment. "They don't define you," she said simply. "What you do now, who you choose to be, that's what matters." Her words stuck with me. As the months turned into years, I built a life that felt entirely my own. Maxwell was a distant memory, his name no longer evoking the rage it once did. Amelia's betrayal, though painful, became a lesson. A reminder of the kind of love I deserved and the boundaries I needed to set. Elena and I continued to grow together, though I made sure to take things slow. This time, I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I had already learned how to stand on my own. Looking back now, I see the journey for what it was. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge, they were all necessary steps in finding myself again. Maxwell and Amelia had tried to break me, but instead, They showed me just how strong I could be. In the end, the real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my ability to rise above it.